12 minutes to submission or your colonies burn. The ultimatum rode in on the blockade's public channel, a voice processed until it sounded like a storm speaking through a grate. Admiral Marin Holt stood at the forward rail of the command deck on USV Quiet Ledger and watched the red timer bleed down in the corner of her visor. 11 minutes, 47 seconds. They had a convoy tucked behind their hulls, grain carriers, a surgical barge, a school ship, and a ring of Vire Dominion cruisers arrayed across the Vesper Gate like black teeth. We teach before we fire, Saint Resolute. The fleet mind folded a soft tone into her ear. I can show them spill models for what they're planning, 9,812 projected casualties from radiant drag alone if they torch the station canopy. They don't plan to torch, Holt said, feeling the faint, constant vibration traveling through the deck from the Ledger's reaction wheels. They plan to scare and harvest. Their doctrine needs demonstrations. Then let's demonstrate something else, said Commander Elias Cade from Tactical. His console threw cold light across his knuckles. I can build a corridor. Not real, real enough. Countdown is live, Lieutenant Imani Quien added from communications. They repeated the terms. Disarm, purge registries, surrender the med barge, or they close the net. The air carried that clean metal scent that came before a hard burn ion dust and coolant mixed. Holt locked her boots tighter and kept her voice level. Saint put the Dominion's words on the outer screens. Big. Give me their math. Decimal points and all. The blockade's message expanded across external glass. The Dominion wanted compliance measured in emptied cargo and a list of every name on the convoy. They offered safe passage on surrender. The timer ticked to 11 minutes, 9 seconds. Hold steady and let them count themselves. Holt lifted her chin and spoke so every ship could hear. This is Admiral Holt of the 7th Relief. We intend to pass the gate with our civilians intact. We will instruct. We will warn. If you attempt to injure non-combatants, we will answer. Reply from Praetor Kest, Quien said. He laughs. He says your answer is already tallied. A subtle hiss ran through the deck as auxiliary cooling spooled up. The hull warmed in the artificial dawn of the gate. The Vire cruisers drifted slightly, adjusting checks against the currents. Their formation read as Ritual 5 at the cord, 2 at the throat, their lances sleeping but hungry. Marin Holt had spent 22 years refusing to become what the enemies of humanity claimed she was. She trained crews to speak in ratios, and to move in ways that showed respect even to those who'd chosen to terrorize grain ships. She believed in teaching until someone made ignorance into a knife. Build your corridor, Elias, she said, but not where they expect it. He grinned without humor. Shadow side of the station's old refrigeration baffles, 30 kilometers wide at peak. We'll shape emissions to look like a mass-damped lane, St. Holt asked. I'll paint it, the fleet mind answered. I'll let their targeting mirrors see only what they desire to see. The convoy crews were quiet, but Holt imagined hands and hearts. She remembered how fear moved in air breaths, held a cough, swallowed on instinct, the heat of someone's palm against painted bulkhead. 10 minutes, 22 seconds left. The Dominion cruisers began to open their bays, because mercy without teeth is only pleading. The fleet moved to stations. The bridge smelled briefly of heated plastic as Quien's board cycled to hardened mode. Cade's vector plot etched like frost across the air as it undulated around the station's shadow. Delicate lines showing where a ship could skate and where it would be cut in two. Chief Engineer Sori Han came on the channel, her voice calm and a little hoarse. Mirror materials are ready. We can launch sheets in 90 seconds. Holt nodded. Say it for the log saint. In Fleet 7th, we teach by numbers and remember by ledgers, never by collars. Before the first move, Holt made space for the living she meant to protect. She asked Quien to open the civilian band, and the screen filled with faces and hands, and the careful dignity of people under a threat they hadn't invited. Farah Day Medtech stood in the surgical barge's corridor, gloves tucked in at her belt. She spoke quietly so sleeping patients wouldn't wake. My daughter's painting stars in the ward. If anyone hears our band, tell her they're not falling. Tell her they're just moving to someplace kinder. A boy in a school ship's reading room cupped a paper model of the Vesper Gate and tried to keep his voice from shaking. My teacher says gates are like rivers. If you jump in at the right time, you come out where you mean to. I'm ready to jump when the Admiral says. A miner with dust still trapped in his sleeves leaned to camera, blinking slow. I only learned to swim in recycled water. It tastes like tin. If you're making a path, make it wide. A nurse with a scar at her temple adjusted a blanket on a sleeping stranger. We have 4 cryopods left. We'll keep them for the ones who can't run. A woman whose face Holt recognized from a market rotation raised a thermos. For the crews who are keeping us calm. I'm making broth as long as there's heat. You can come by. A young interpreter held up both hands, palms inked with words from the 3 languages common in the convoy. We can say thank you in all of them when we cross. A mechanic with grease on her cheek wiped at it and laughed once. I packed the children's shoes near the airlock. Not because I think we'll have to run, because I want to be ready to dance. Holt eased breath down until her chest felt anchored instead of pulled up by the throat. All ships, she said. We make the path. We keep our promise. Open your hand, but don't drop the tool. Saint Resolute's field of attention widened. The fleet mind spoke in a cadence that had soothed rookies through orbital fire training and kept veterans from looking too long at the light of damaged ships. Begin mirror lattice deployment. Inflatables only. Hold rigid frames in reserve. Cade sent the order. Cargo bays on corvettes shed plasticized bundles that opened like metal flowers, petals catching the faint pressure of outgassed helium and hardening into hex panels. The panels linked with microspines. Together, they became a loose skin curved around the fleet. In a staggered array, eye-shaped gaps, built to invite a particular kind of mistake. Queen whispered counts. 27 mirrors, 3241. Dominion eyes are narrowing. Holt felt the deck's hum shift again as heat spilled into radiators, and Saint skimmed energy across the mirror skin, making it glint with what the Vire algorithms expected from a lane-suppressed ion scatter, a false tide. The Dominion cruisers angled lances the ancient cruelty of straight lines, making math out of fear. They sent a warning shot past the med barge. The lance grazed the edge of a mirror panel, and the panel writhed like a fish scale in hot water. Cade adjusted vectors by 300 meters, hands precise. They're calibrating. Praetor's advisors still think we're bluffing. Show them patience, Holt said. They need to see it. Let them find themselves in what they aim. Saint turned a fraction of the lattice. The next beam came a clean rod of star-hot white with a thin blue halo and met the panel at the angle Cade had plotted. Instead of burning through the beam, wavered split and slid along curves. Some of it scattered into a harmless curtain. Some of it bent its path, becoming what it would be if it had been fired to a different place. Queen swore, then released the word as if it were a prayer. We caught it. We turned it. Cade corrected, sweat drawing a line down his temple. It's skating. The diverted energy burned bright in vacuum, and then smeared into the dark, a painter's stroke of heat. It did not touch the convoy. It instead lit the open corridor. Cade had marked a glowing mouth that advertised safety to an algorithm that preferred evidence to rumor. Praetor Kest is messaging, Quien said, reading quickly. He says mercy has a price. He says we can still pay, and he will escort us. Holt thought of how often men like Kest said escort and meant a rope around the waist. Ignore, she said. Convoy come to heading 267 microaxel at point 8. We skim the baffles. Let their pride frame our picture. Count the breaths before you move. The fleet edged forward, radiator fins shedding heat in long, slow sheets that glowed for a heartbeat and then faded. The hull's micro-thrusters thrummed. The mirror lattice tightened as it drifted with them, a cloak shifting its lay on a shoulder. The gate's shadows complicated radar returns, making even honest ships look sly. Praetor Kest's cruisers pivoted to aim at the mouth the lattice had painted. They would not fire into what they thought was their own promise. They would not risk the public story that they killed people while offering passage. Their doctrine required the theater of permission. Elias Holt said put 2 decoys at the mouth. 2 drones left a corvette's belly, their rounded bodies whispering as they spun up. They carried mass heat and the particular jitter of life support noise recorded in the holds weeks ago. They were not smart. They were honest liars. Hold the door long enough to prove there is one. The convoy slipped into the shaped light. A child on the school ship pressed her face to glass and watched mirrored fire slide along an invisible parabolic skin, as if wind were bending light around them. The med barge's nurses strapped patients twice and checked anchors 3 times. On the market ferry, the woman with the thermos cried without sound and kept the lid tightly in place. The Dominion's public channel went quiet for a 3 count that felt like a lifetime. Then their cruisers adjusted posture again, slightly higher, slightly wider. Kest's voice returned shorebreak over stones. "Human fleet, you are in violation of conditions. You will spill your names, or you will be named by ash." Holt answered even and clear. "Names are given, not stolen. We will not give you what you want to use to frighten people later. We will share our ledger when we're safe. You will see it." Saint let the mirrors flare once. The Praetor's lance teams, confronted with a corridor that glowed with their false permission, ceased firing. Algorithms whispered confirmation. The Dominion's doctrine pulled the trigger on restraint because their own public promise was aimed back at their hearts. Cade muttered, almost reverent. "They trapped themselves. Only if we keep the path straight," Holt said. "Saint, prepare for side lash. They'll try to knife around and cut the tail." Sorihan's voice cut in steady as iron. "One of the lattice spines is under stress. If we take a glancing blow, it'll shed a scale. We'll lose mirror integrity at Sector 3. "What do you need?" Holt asked. 15 more seconds with current heat load. Then I can reroute cooling through the dorsal run. We'll pay for it later." "Take it!" The word tasted like metal. The ledger's deck plates creaked a fraction as thermal expansion found a seam and made it sing. "Brace without breaking." The Vire side ships surged their engines, making a low carrier wave. Holt felt in her molars. A lance shot grazed the lattice and a panel flared white gold, and then winked out, leaving a diamond-shaped hole that felt for a beat like a missing tooth. The med barge took a small buffeting and reported 2 nurses bruised where they slammed into a cabinet. On the frigate Harrow, a heat exchanger blew a gasket, and 2 crew caught flash burns on their wrists as they yanked manual overrides. Sori logged their names in the medical channel voices, tight with pain and relief. "Rerouting now," Sori said, breathing a little harder. "Dorsal run engaged. Radiator load is peaking but stable. Convoy is halfway through the baffles," Quien said. "If we keep their eyes on the mouth, we'll be clear in 2 minutes. Make them follow a light that isn't ours." Holt watched a shadow flicker. That wasn't a Vire hull. It was reflected. The beam they'd turned earlier had scattered enough to make a ghost ship on the edge of Dominion sensors. Saint caught Holt's thought and amplified. "I can build that shadow into a signature," the AI said. "We'll give it the posture of a heavy gunship that hates to run." "Do it!" Holt let a slow breath go. Her heartbeat sounded loud in her own neck, steady and persuasive. "Give it a wounded pride." The ghost slid along the mirror edge, always just outside the most dangerous view. 2 Dominion cutters peeled off to chase it, their commanders eager for a prize they could drag to their message boards and call a lesson. The cutter's departures widened the net at a point Holt needed. Queen's voice softened a notch. "Admiral, the boy with the paper gate is back on band. He's telling the other children they can breathe now." "Good." Holt let the single word pass through her like a chord resolved. Keep him talking. Your calm is a tool as sharp as any blade. For a precious span, the path held. The convoy's wakes made long, pale threads of gas that curled and subsided. The lattice held enough of its shape for the Dominion's eyes to believe in it. The Dominion's doctrine kept their guns from telling a story against their own public promise. 2 minutes turned into 1, and change. Then Praetor Kest altered the play. Reading a formation change, Cade said. They're opening what looks like a generous corridor at starboard cardinal, big enough to brag about. They mean to be helpful. Their doctrine, Saint said, voice trimmed close, allows a staged corridor to keep narrative control. If we take it, we submit to being escorted. If we don't, we look stubborn. He'll say we disrespected their mercy. He'll line that corridor with scythes, Holt said. She watched the new opening paint itself on her plot, a bloom of dark flanked by 2 clean quiet. He'll make himself the gate. And then he'll close his fingers when our last ship's in his palm. Balance the book before you sign. Holt raised the civilian band again before she decided. She needed to see faces to remind herself what weight felt like when it was made of people. The miner with dust in his sleeves had secured his bracelets with tape so they wouldn't fly off if the ship jolted. The nurse had her jaw set, and a bruise rising violet on her cheekbone. The interpreter had smeared 1 inked word wiping her forehead, and now the letters looked like a river. Cade glanced at Holt and spoke low. We can take the corridor and spring his scythes before the convoy gets deep. I can flip their tripwires and make their weapons log themselves as aggressors, but we have to take it on in the open. Queen's eyes were wet but steady. Alternative is we keep skimming and hope the lattice holds. It might not. Sori came back with numbers. If we hold current vector, I can maintain heat margins for another 40 seconds before we have to dump. If we dump our signature spikes, and the Dominion will decide we're being clever. Cleverness sometimes hurts doctrine more than violence. If we take the corridor now, our radiators will get a wash of cold. We'll look like we're accepting help. Holt rolled her shoulders and felt the ache that arrived when decisions wanted to bend her back. She remembered standing in courts and in cargo holds and in blistered camps telling people with gentle voices that the point of things was not victory, but precedent. She could not let Kest own what mercy meant here. She said it so only her bridge heard. Saint opened the ledger mask. I have an accounting mask ready, the AI answered. A mirror of their own escort protocols that we can fit around their corridor like a glove. If they accept the handshake, their doctrine compels them to publish the bill for any harm. If they harm us, they must write their own names on the damage. Do I have the seconds? Holt asked. You have 36, Sori answered. After that, you have heat like a fever. Holt tapped the glass rail with 2 fingers and turned to the fleet. All ships, she said. We will enter the Praetor's corridor. We will do so under our terms. Saint will place an accounting skin along their edges. You will fly with quiet hands. You will not bite unless you must. We will make them choose in public. Open the door and hold the receipt. The Dominion corridor widened like a mouth trying to look like a smile. Holt felt a small shake under her feet as the ledger's forward jets corrected against a gust from the gate's edge. The mirror lattice flexed like a lung. Saint's attention poured into invisible jets of signal that stitched along the corridor's inner walls. Each stitch was a condition, a number, an expectation. Queen's fingers danced, handshake returning. They accepted. The Praetor thinks he is generous. Cade tapped in the decoy drone's last moves and drew the ghost ship up to the corridor's far edge to look afraid in the right way. When they close their thumb, I'll have the print. Convoy Holt said, opening her voice to every home patch and makeshift ward. We are walking through a place they made. We will carry our own light. Count not to hide, but to guide. The first 3 civilian ships passed the threshold. The school ship took a shiver of look at me scatter, and every child inside shouted quietly, because shouting quietly felt like magic. The surgical barge slid past, and the nurses swayed as if following a song. The market ferry's owner gripped the thermos until her knuckles paled and whispered to herself that she would put something sweet in it when they were through. The cutters flanking the corridor matched speed with an elegance that came from years of practice aimed at the wrong ends. Their lances stayed nominal. Their bays remained shut. Their doctrine was a chain laid in gold and manners. Praetor Kest returned to the public band. "Human Admiral, I will deliver your poor. You will remember who held the door for you." Holt looked at the numbers climbing across the inside of her visor. Every stitch the fleet mind had made took hold and was recognized by the Dominion's own counting. Every clause of their escort meant a shadow of liability. If they bit, they wrote it down in ink they could not deny later. She said, "Not sweet, not bitter, only true, we will remember Praetor. Names are for memory. Do not forget who records the last line." One of the Dominion cutters breathed strange. Cade saw it first. "There," he said, pointing with 2 fingers like he was touching a hot thing gently. "They have a low-band scythe spun up. It's not a lance. It's a whisper blade. It's meant to slice a radiator without singing." Sori exhaled. "If it kisses us, we will leak cold. We will shake. We can keep going. But we will look weak." "Can we take it?" Holt asked. "I built the glove," Saint said. "If they scratch, they sign." "Then let them choose," Holt said. "Elias, prepare to flip their corridor when the last convoy stern crosses our mark. I want it to become theirs again. Inside out." Cade blinked. Then he smiled like a tired knife. A killbox turned inside out. "Yes, Admiral." The convoy moved like a line of breath through a throat. The last freighter's stern lights winked white across the rail of the corridor. The Dominion cutter with the whisper blade edged 3 meters closer than courtesy. Everything felt close. The console glare made the bridge colors look too clean. Holt could hear her own suit's heartbeat monitor gentle and insistently alive. "Anchor your breath in the reel." The whisper blade opened. It was a small thing, a crescent in the dark. It shaved where it kissed. It touched the ledger's forward radiator at the fold of a fin, and stitched a neat cut an arm's length long. A spray of sublimating coolant made a glittering shower like a brief snowfall in vacuum and drifted into the corridor's light. 2 of Sori's people hollered as alarms chirped and their gloves stung with cold through heated fabric. Quien gasped. Holt didn't move her jaw. Saint's voice came level. "They signed," Flip Holt said. Cade turned the corridor. "Not with metal, with rules." The accounting mask Saint had set along the corridor's edges inverted their flow. What had been allowance became admission. What had been escort became contact. Dominion optics, which had been designed to narrate extorted mercy, now narrated violation of their own vows. Publicly, irrevocably, with the Praetor's signature. Show them what their words weigh when they fall. Alarms along the Dominion chain chimed in white and then deepened to a brown note. One cutter stuttered its posture, embarrassed by the math more than by the cut. The corridor's walls, invisible in reality, but thick on the feeds, flashed from generous green to punitive amber for a heartbeat, and then settled into something cooler. Every open channel showed the same math the Dominion had hurt a ship under escort. The Dominion had to publish cost or publish shame. Kest's voice came in late and clipped. "There is a fault in your numbers." "Your numbers," Holt said. "Not mine. We borrowed your pen." She watched the coolant glitter drift and fade like a winter spent at a station window. She thought of the miner and the nurse and the boy with his folded gait. She didn't look away when Sori reported the burn on her crewman's wrist that would scar in the shape of a crescent. "Keep the ledger clean even when it hurts." "Convoy clear ahead," Quyen said, breath shaking once and then steady. "We need 70 seconds to follow without scuffing the walls." "We'll take them," Holt said. Saint makes sure the broadcast record is mirrored to the markets, the schools, the courts, and the places where doctrine goes to preen. If Kest tries to tuck this under a mat, I want 1,000 copies under 1,000 doors. I'm already sweeping, Saint answered. Market boards are arguing about font size. For a long second, the corridor held a truce shaped like embarrassment. Dominion lances stayed asleep. The mirror lattice, bruised but not broken, kept the wrong light in the right places. The convoy's wake looked like thread caught on a nail, shimmering and then gone. Holt lifted her eyes to the gate and felt the fatigue behind them as something honest. She did not yet hope. She counted. Count until hope doesn't need you. A ping from the far edge of the system arrived like a pebble tapped against a helmet. Quyen read it, frowned, and made the word quiet. New mass signature. Heavy. Vire registry masked as a neutral hauler. It's hauling a crowd control array. They mean to block the path beyond the corridor with a net of sound. It will make people sick and stupid. It will not be technically an attack. Escalation number 1, Cade said. He wants his narrative back. Then we keep ours, Holt said. Her throat felt dry. The air tasted faintly of lemon from the wipes someone had used to clean a panel 5 minutes too late. We'll cross, and then we'll teach at scale. Saint whispered her name. Marin, I can make their array sing against itself. If we thread a lattice out past the corridor, we can turn their pressure into silence, where our people are, and a clear tone where their command likes quiet. Holt's lips lifted at one corner, like a bell in a too polite room. We should expect his second change of plan, Cade said. He will open a corridor we cannot refuse. He will offer blessing we cannot afford. He will try to put our hand on his ledger. Holt looked at the coolant scar still glimmering along the edge of her radiator on the external feed. She looked at the crease of Sori's mouth and the way Cade kept his shoulders square on purpose. She said, he already did. We made him write his name beside it, and we will read it back to him. The Dominion cutters adjusted again their movements, a choreography gone brittle. The corridor began to widen in invitation and narrow in warning, both at once, like a host who had realized the guest knew the game and was trying to invent a new rule at the door. The heavy hauler bearing the crowd control array drifted toward the exit vector, innocent as a door that opened onto a pit. Holt heard the fleet mind's tone change soft and thick with computation. I can build a second skin farther out. Not a corridor, a field of polite refusal. If they step wrong, their doctrine will hear them do it. Do it, Holt said. She took one more breath and tasted the coolant's ghost cold in it, as if the ship itself had exhaled on her tongue. Then mark me a point where the after can begin. Cade lifted his hands. Queen squared her shoulders. Sori murmured to her team, and the sound of her voice steadied the engineer who had burned his wrist. The convoy's last stern light reached the far hash on Holt's plot. Holt looked at the place where the Dominion's new gift bloomed bright and dangerous, and she saw the shape of the second set of teeth hiding in it. Saint, she said, her voice low and sure, prepare the accounting mask for the open corridor beyond the gate. When we step out of this throat, we will turn their doctrine inside out again. When he tells us to be grateful, we will hand him the bill. The corridor's mouth widened like a wound learning to heal under watch, and Holt put her hand on the rail the way a captain does when she wants to feel the ship's patience through the steel. She watched the lights drift like slow fireflies past the edge of her hyod and listened to the heartbeat in her own ears, count the beats between what had happened and what would. The corridor's edge softened into open space and the heavy hauler drifted like a boulder pretending to be a ferry. The hauler's belly doors showed seams that looked old, but the plating around them gleamed. The bridge smelled faintly of warmed sealant. Holt rubbed her thumb once along the guardrail and felt the oil from gloves that had held it through worse. Turn their volume against them, Saint, she said, thread the refusal field around their array. Make our frequencies the quiet between notes. I will place dampers at every harmonic they intend to weaponize, the fleet mind answered. Her tone carried a layered hum that Holt felt in the bones of her jaw. I can also open a narrow band to ring in their command chamber alone. It will be politeness made undeniable. Keep it just this side of harm, Holt said. Give them clarity that scrapes but does not cut. Praetor Kest is issuing a fresh declaration, Quine reported. Console glare silvered her cheek. He says the corridor beyond the gate belongs to order. He will decide whose feet are clean enough to pass. Tell him to clean his own ledger. Holt nodded to Cade. Positions. He drew vectors that curved like careful handwriting. We wrap the convoy with 2 arcs of mirror petals and keep the wounded radiator inside the shadows. The refusal field will appear as a transparent mist to their sensors. They will step into it and feel embarrassed in front of their doctrine before they feel anything like pain. Sorihan spoke over a hiss as valves shifted. I've stabilized the fin. It will scar into a ripple we'll have to smooth at dock. 2 crew are bandaged. They're arguing about who gets to log the repair because they both want to sign the same page. Holt let her mouth soften. Give them both a line. She opened the civilian band before the next move. Faces, please. A baker on the market ferry stood with flour on her palms, breathing in a steady 4 count. I've got dough-proofed and nowhere warm to bake it. When we pass, I'm turning the med barge's vent into a makeshift oven. A violin teacher on the school ship tuned by touch with the tip of her finger on a string. I'll play songs without words. The children know where to hum. Oh. A heavy-set man in a station jumpsuit held a seedling in a translucent cube. My father started these at Austra's cold rim. He said plants trust the quiet in people. I'll keep it near the hull. A teenager with a shaved head and a smile that crinkled one eye tapped a ring against a pipe. I get motion sick. The sound helps me. If you can keep the bad sound off, I'll help others keep the good. A grandmother whose wrist shook poured tea into 3 cups and set them near a handhold. For the ones who saved us and for the ones who did not learn yet how to. A dockhand with tattoos shaped like waves showed his palms. Tell the praetor there's no such thing as a clean foot on a ship that works. Holt felt the hull's vibration deepen as the hauler's array spooled. The air took on the pressure of a storm on the other side of a wall. She rolled her shoulders once as if loosening a rope. We teach first, even when they try to shout. The refusal field spread like wet silk in vacuum, invisible except where it met the lie. The hauler's array reached for the convoy with a broad palm of pressure meant to wash minds. Saint's counterweb cupped around it and fed the pressure back into a shaped echo. The hauler's command chamber bloomed with a pure tone like a choir hitting a single note without words. Holt watched Dominion posture indicators flicker from confident to confused. Kest came through with his theater voice dipped in iron. Human Admiral, you are making sport of peace. Peace doesn't wear teeth around children, Holt said. You may exit the stage. Calm is not compliance. The hauler tried to hold its tone steady. The refusal field shaved harmonics until the pressure sheets became draft. The convoy steadied. On the school ship, the violin teacher bowed a simple line that sounded like courage baked into bread. On the med barge, the baker's dough rose under a thermal hood and made the air smell like yeast and an old kitchen. Cade's hands were precise. Their second ring is powering. 6 light cutters tucked behind the hauler. They aim to swarm our tail and cut the lattice from behind. We can't simply outrun them without pulling heat. Sori exhaled a quiet laugh. We don't have the heat to pull. Then we turn the room, Holt said. We promised a lesson. Build the room so they hear themselves. Saint poured out a map that filled the bridge like frost on glass. I can extend the mirror petals into a shallow bowl and let their swarms chase our ghosts along the rim. If we pin their doctrine to an empty back wall, their own regs will require them to stop to keep the story intact. Make the bowl, Holt said. Elias draft decoys that leak the kind of impatience the praetor loves to correct. Cade grinned, despite the tightness around his eyes. Little ships that look like they want to show off. Quinn murmured counts that had more rhythm than worry. Their cutters are rising onto the rim. They're biting at reflections. Holt felt the suit's heartbeat whisper against her ribs. Coolant hissed once through a vent behind her, a cat's breath against her calf. The bowl came into being not a wall, but a suggestion. The Dominion swarms chased ghosts and found safety rails that led them away from flesh. Praetor Kest spoke low. You refuse to understand the purpose of fear. You refuse to understand its cost, Holt answered. Your fear spills forward into schools. Tally what you pour on other people's tables. The swarm commanders paused to read their own manuals, caught in a doctored mirror of their doctrine. Cade flicked decoys like crumbs and watched them peck and settle. Sori's team damped a jitter in the wounded fin until it hummed instead of buzzed. The convoy moved past the hauler and into the broader breadth of the system. Escalation, Quine announced, eyes narrowing at a faint return. Praetor Kest is calling in a regional enforcement craft. Masked signature. They will pose as neutrals arranging transit and then announce violations that require seizure of the med barge per Vire sanitary code. Cade swore softly. He's going to steal the sick with paperwork. Triangle, Holt said. Saint your calculus. If we jam their code, we justify his narrative that we disrespect order. The AI answered voice very clean. If we submit, we surrender people to a laboratory with cameras. If we publish our ledger of harm and broadcast their blade, we can create a fork where his own audience must choose between doctrine and face. Queen lifted her head. And if we make the choice public in his mouth, he either pays or loses the chorus. Holt's throat went dry. She could taste the lemon wipes again, sharp at the back of her tongue. Prepare a system-scale inversion, she said. We will use their sanction mesh against the sanctioner. Teach them with their own blackboard. Before the set piece, Holt opened the civilian band one more time. She needed their weight added to the beam. A paramedic on the med barge adjusted a mask on an old man's face and spoke softly. We've got 9 on oxygen. If we delay 2, we'll fall asleep too deep to wake without tubes. A boy with the paper gate now had ink on his fingers. I'm drawing stars that look like pebbles because pebbles don't fall. They bounce. A young mother tied her hair up with a strip torn from her shirt. If they try to make us line up for their code, I will go to the back. The old and the babies go first. A translator with a cracked tooth smiled despite the pain. I can make their words mean themselves again if you put them in my ear. A retired pilot sitting with a sling on his arm held his good hand out to steady a stranger. If the ship shakes, take my hand. It remembers how. A child in a red sweater held a soft toy patched 3 times and whispered, My bear is not afraid. Holt swallowed once and felt the motion in her neck. Saint, she said, build me the inside out. I will lay a sanction frame across the corridor beyond the gate, Saint said. When the enforcement craft declares an inspection, their doctrine will auto-issue a bill of custody. If they attempt seizure under that code after our acceptance, all responsibility for transport mortality and treatment harm will attach to the praetor by name. And we'll accept, Holt said. Cade blinked. Admiral, we will accept the inspection. In the language of their law, she said. And when they bite, they will do it with their own signature visible in every square. Publish to markets, schools, clinics, and courts. Make the mirror gentle. Make the ledger legible. Write the contract so the knife has its owner's name. They stepped into the corridor of neutral transit codes. It smelled like ozone across the bridge as legal bands lit with handshake. The enforcement craft, clean and gray, and pretending to be a ferry for legalities, slid into position. Prepare for inspection, the craft announced with a voice that had been sanded flat. Present your sick for sanitary transport. Quien responded with perfect diction. Acknowledged. Per Vire Code. Section 91. Escort accepts liability for harm after acceptance. We accept escort terms and publish our ledger subroutine. Silence, and then a hitch in the enforcement craft's posture that was almost human. Kest arrived behind the voice with sugar that had cracked. Admiral Holt, you are clever in a way that will cost you. Do you understand? I understand the cost, Holt said. That is why I count. Count until their masks don't fit. The enforcement craft extended docking collars like careful hands. Cade tracked vector drift to a micrometer. Sori watched coolant temperature with the concentration of a surgeon. The enforcement officers stepped into the med barge's vestibule with scanners held like candles in a procession. The first officer's scanner chirped, and the chirp became a tone that lanced back through their doctrine into their public logs. Saint had given their device the truth. Every scan wrote liability math in real time. Markets lit with the numbers. Schools lit. Clinics lit. A whisper in the Dominion's own channels said, "We are being watched by our children." Kest lost a decibel of control. "Halt your broadcast." "It's your broadcast," Holt said. "We helped your machine speak clearly. Speak so the room can't pretend it didn't hear." The enforcement team moved like people trying to walk on a floor that tilted. One paused beside an old woman with a cracked oxygen mask and adjusted it with unexpected care. The scanner wrote the care down too. The room could not decide whether to be angry or proud. For a heartbeat, Holt pitied Kest, the human buried under his doctrine. Admiral Saint said quietly, "They are preparing a third escalation. He is calling for a gate burndown, a brief inversion of field, to scatter our wake and make our ships twitch. He will then claim instability and abort the escort riding blame toward us." Cade's shoulders tightened. "We can ride a burndown if we brace. The school ship will rattle." "Not only ride," Holt said. "Elias opened the corridor. They think they're closing." He looked at her for a beat, then laughed once without mirth. "We turn their open door into a pit for their pride. Make it a pit soft enough that only pride falls," she said. "Open what they think they own." Saint flooded space with a gentle weave. The mirror petals reoriented to present a facade of nothing. Behind the facade lay guide rails tuned to Dominion balancing thrusters. When the burndowns slurred the field, their ships would correct by doctrine, and those corrections would steer them into a pocket where their own escort code made them slow and apologize to their passengers. Kest would have to kneel to his narrative. The field flipped like a polite carpet tugged by an uncle playing with a toddler. Dominion hulls swayed. The school ship rattled. The violin teacher set bow to string and drew a line. Children counted with her without being told. The enforcement craft drifted into the pocket lights, pulsing amber. Its own speakers asked its own officers to pause and evaluate the safety of motion under escort liability. Queen hid a smile that had too much exhaustion to be cruel. "The enforcement lead is asking the praetor for permission to continue." Kest did not answer. He could not say yes without signing. He could not say no without looking small. Let silence show the cost of no. Seconds turned into a minute that stretched. The air on the ledger tasted like warmed metal and the ghost of tea someone had spilled in the junior station 2 hours back. Holt's suit heartbeat slowed. Sori reported the fin's temperature holding. Cade kept his hands still over the controls, without touching them, as if his steadiness could bleed through glass. Then the Dominion made a fourth change. Mass signature. Quien said, voice flat. Praetor Kest's flagship is leaving its anchor. He's bringing a lance battery forward. He means to erase the record with fear. Cade's chin lifted by a degree. "We can break that battery or die making a point." Saint's voice was gentle. "Marin, my calculation says 92% chance we can neutralize without hull loss using a full-spectrum mirror, but 38% chance of injury aboard our ships from stress." We've taught, Holt said. We've warned. And we still have to keep the promise. Hold the line without hating the hand. Before the shot, Holt asked Quayan to open the band one last time before the fight turned hot. A machinist on the freighter with grease in the grooves of his fingerprints showed a wrench like a lucky charm. I was going to fix a pump today. I'll fix whatever you point me at when we get through. A girl with star stickers on her helmet earguards tapped them. If the ship hums, I will hum back. The baker lifted the thermal hood. The first loaf smelled incredible and human. When we cross, the med barge gets first slices. A medic leaned a shoulder against a bulkhead and closed his eyes for 1 second longer than a blink. Count us through, he said. Say the numbers like you mean them. Holt set her palms on the rail and spoke so the fleet could feel how her voice held. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We are not a protest. We are a passage. Count forward until their threats are behind you. Kest fired. It was not the brightest beam Holt had ever seen. Brightness is a poor measure of harm in vacuum. It was sure. It came like a metronome striking the wrong side of a bar. The lance met the full-spectrum mirror Saint had hung like a curtain across the flagship's best path. It did not bounce. It slid and split like a raindrop dragged along tempered glass. It scattered into a bruise of light. Instruments sang. Radiators blushed. The convoy did not burn. The flagship's own image caught its remnant in a christening splash that etched a shallow scar along its paint. The Dominion's public channels lit with the record of a shot under escort conditions. Kest's voice trembled with controlled rage. You have turned the heavens into a court. The sky was already a court, Holt said. You wrote the rules. Balance the book while your hands are steady. Cade released 6 decoy drones that moved like nervous escorts trying to impress a superior. The Dominion cutters moved to protect face and fell into the pocket again, apologizing to their own passengers. The refusal field took the hauler's noise and made it into a low chant that soothed rather than scattered. The ledger mask logged another line, escort fired, liability accrues. Sorry reported through a hiss of released pressure. We have microfractures in a secondary coolant line. I'm sealing them with field tape and a prayer. Make the prayer a knot, Holt said. The flagship tried a side slash that would have clipped the school ship. Saint tilted the mirror field by 1/2 degree. The slash's heat became a shimmer that flowed along rails designed not to cut. The children's hum did not break. Holt felt the old grief that had carried her through earlier wars loosen its fingers. She did not desire Kest's destruction. She desired his doctrine's arrest. Teach the person and unseat the creed. Kest flung a last gambit. I offer you a corridor to depart without record. I will strike the ledger if you admit the error of your performance. Queen's eyebrows lifted. He means to bribe with oblivion. Decline, Holt said, but give him a door with his name on it. Saint threaded a final mask along the system's merchant band, the place where rumor dressed as news. If he rescinds his ultimatum policy for civilian corridors within this system, the AI said the ledger will mark this day as the precedent. His face will be the face attached to mercy. I can make the signature look like a medal. Offer it, Holt said. Let him choose between fear and a monument that doesn't fit his mouth. Open a door his pride can't walk through without changing shape. Silence. The flagship slowed by a fraction easily missed by uninterested eyes. Kest wanted to be remembered as a storm. He had been handed a scribe's pen. The enforcement craft captain, perhaps more human than his praetor wanted, spoke on a private band that wasn't private enough. Praetor, the children are singing. The markets are watching and our mothers are there. Kest swallowed it. Holt heard it in the shape of his breath between words. Stand down, he said finally, voice like a rope frayed one thread at a time. Escort continues without interdiction. Future corridors will not require seizure. Queen let out a sound that was not a laugh and not a sob. He blinked. Holt kept her voice level. Record the policy change, she said. Published to ledgers civic and legal. Public tally confirmed. The convoy moved into the wide of the system as if a throat had unclenched. The refusal field exhaled and fell away like fog burned off by a patient sun. The mirror petals cooled, turning from blush to pewter as radiators shed their ache into quiet. On the med barge, the baker cut bread and handed slices to nurses, with hands that shook then steadied. On the school ship, the violin teacher let the bow fall to her side and smiled until her cheeks ached. Sori's team sealed the last tape on the coolant line and patted the patch like a pet. The engineer with the crescent burn on his wrist looked at it and said, "I'll keep it," with a pride that had no bite. Cade leaned his forearms on the console and finally let out a breath that made his shoulders drop. "Admiral, we turned a Killbox inside out twice and made them apologize without forcing a surrender. We made them publish their choices," Holt said. "Apologies live where ink dries. Write the aftermath so it can't be unread." They did not celebrate on the bridge. They worked. They guided. They made sure the hauler drifted to a safe station and did not crack its array on a rock. They sent Saint to harvest copies of the Praetor's policy change across 10 different boards, so no one could later pretend the promise had not been made. When the system's quiet felt honest, Holt allowed herself the smallest sit against the rail boots still locked. The deck hummed with contentment. The air smelled like warm metal yeast and a little scorched insulation that would be cleaned by night shift with lemon and patience. Queen glanced at Holt. "Admiral, you know this will ripple. They will call us accountants with guns." "We are accountants with open hands," Holt said. "We count so that later no one can say they didn't know." She asked Saint to open a line to the civilian band. Faces arrived, the baker with flour still on her wrist. The violin teacher with shoulder leant against a bulkhead. The miner with his bracelets taped the boy with ink-stained fingers. The grandmother's trembling hand steady on a cup. The translator with a chipped tooth. The child with the patched bear. Holt nodded to them all as if in a doorway. "Oh, your names are yours," she said. "We kept our promise. Keep promises even when nobody is looking." Days later, when the 7th Relief had escorted the convoy beyond Vesper's reach and set a course that glided them into a lane where no doctrine owned a corridor, Holt stood alone at the forward rail. The stars were not pinpricks. They were distances resolved into patience. Her suit heartbeat sounded like quiet rain. Saint arrived in her ear with the warmth of a friend who had learned something and wanted to say it gently. "Marin, the ledgers have begun to change language. 3 mid-tier Dominion systems have copied the Praetor's corridor policy. An internal memo uses the word forbid. Their ultimatum doctrine loses teeth where people trade bread." "Good," Holt said. "Keep copies. Send them to schools." "I have a small number to add," Saint said. 9,812 projected casualties from the first day if we had not made the corridor. Actual recorded harm: 2 burns, 3 bruises, 2 cracked ribs, and 1 crescent scar. Holt closed her eyes and let that math pass through her like a tide. "We teach by numbers," she said. "And remember by ledgers," Saint finished. "Never by collars. Set the precedent so that others don't have to bleed to remember." On a public record, thick as a city's wall, a permanent line appeared. Ultimatum for transit policy, rescinded for civilian corridors within Vesper and adjacencies. Escort liabilities attached to issuer in perpetuity. It sat like a stone no one could lift without admitting to have lifted it. Holt rested her palm on the rail long enough to feel the ship's contentment run back into her hand. She thought of Kest's silence, the enforcement captain's whisper about mothers, the way the enforcement scanner had recorded kindness and harm with equal precision. She thought of bread and humming and a child's patched bear. She spoke aloud to the quiet. "We were asked to kneel to a threat. We counted instead. We taught without crowing. We endured damage without romanticizing pain. We turned a weapon into a mirror, and then we handed the mirror back. The point was never to win a duel. The point was to make the next demand ashamed of itself. The mirror arrays cooled to pewter. On the public screens, the corridor policy glowed in steady letters. We do not bargain with threats. We teach them what they cost.